The bus stopped blues. The bus sighed to a stop, a weary exhale of brakes and metal. Lily, poised for flight, tightened her grip on her backpack straps. "Dad, come on, we'll miss it." She bounded down the steps, her gaze already searching for Maya's telltale violet jacket, commandeering their usual window perch. George wrestled with his worn messenger bag. "Hold your horses, Lilypad. Just need to secure the aha." He brandished the foil-wrapped sandwich, its surface a chaotic canvas of tiny, hand-drawn robots. "Brain food for your scholastic endeavors?" Lily groaned halfway to the entrance. "Seriously, Dad, robot sandwiches again? Just hurry!" He beamed, impervious to her teenage mortification. "One must always be prepared, my dear, especially when the preparation involves paternal affection and precisely 3 grams of industrial-strength peanut butter." With an impatient wave, Lily called, Yeah, love you, gotta go." She squeezed past a throng of boisterous students, laser-focused on Maya. Sandwich aloft like a tiny metallic flag, George shuffled toward the stairs, muttering about optimal peanut butter distribution for peak enjoyment. The doors wheezed shut before he even reached the first step, catching him completely off guard. Lily, already deep in conversation with Maya, hadn't noticed a thing. "Maya, over here!" She plopped into the seat, her backpack hitting the floor with a soft thud. "Guess what Mr. Abernathy said about the mitochondria?" Outside, George blinked in disbelief. The bus lumbered forward, belching a cloud of sooty exhaust. He was stranded, utterly and completely marooned. He watched as it gathered speed, the faces within blurring into an indistinguishable mass. Lily was gone, swallowed by the morning commute. A prickling sensation, sharp and unfamiliar, bloomed in his chest. It wasn't mere disappointment. It was something deeper, colder, heavier. He stared at the robot sandwich. The foil reflected the sunlight in a mocking glint. Had she even registered his presence? Had she spared a backward glance? A dizzy spell threatened to overwhelm him. He slumped onto the cool metal of the bench, the sandwich feeling suddenly like a stone in his hand. The rumble of the departing bus dissolved into the city's relentless din, leaving him stranded in a sea of his own thoughts. Memories flickered. Lily, a toddler, glued to his leg at the park, terrified to venture onto the swings. His patient coaxing, the gentle pushes, his reassuring voice promising he'd always be there. Then, the day she just let go, pumping her legs, soaring toward the sky, pure joy etched on her face, a picture of self-reliance. Pride, of course, had swelled in his chest, but alongside it, a whisper of loss. This felt like that, amplified to an unbearable volume. He replayed the scene in excruciating detail. Lily's hurried departure, the near-absent acknowledgement, the dismissive, "love you, gotta go." It was all so perfunctory, so routine. Was he simply a fixture now? Background scenery in her increasingly vibrant and independent life? Intellectually, he understood the natural progression. Teenagers needed space, craved autonomy. Lily was growing up, evolving. Yet, his heart, that hopelessly optimistic and slightly foolish organ, refused to concede. He felt forsaken. He shivered, drawing his worn tweed jacket tighter against the growing chill. The sun seemed to have lost its warmth. The air hung heavy with the scent of exhaust and unrealized expectations. A stray mutt, a scruffy terrier with hopeful eyes, approached the bench, sniffing tentatively at his shoes. Lost in his melancholic reverie, George remained oblivious. The dog whined softly, then, sensing his lack of engagement, wandered off in search of a more welcoming soul. George finally surfaced, his gaze unfocused. He noticed the remnants of Lily's haste. A crumpled napkin discarded on the ground, a solitary bobby pin gleaming on the pavement like a fallen star. He picked up the bobby pin, turning it over in his fingers. Such a trivial object, yet it symbolized everything. A life relentlessly forging ahead, leaving him in its wake. He clenched his fist around it, a sudden and unfamiliar steeliness hardening his features. He refused to be left behind. He wouldn't become a forgotten artifact in the rapidly unfolding narrative of his daughter's life. He rose, the robot sandwich still clutched in his other hand. He stared down the road, tracing the path of the departed bus. A slow smile crept across his face. He wouldn't simply stand idly by, watching life rush past. He would seize control. He would act. He would do something audacious, something unforgettable. He wouldn't be abandoned. Not anymore. A plan began to crystallize in his mind. He started walking, his gait imbued with a newfound purpose. The robot sandwich, forgotten, tumbled from his grasp, landing with a muffled thud. The terrier, circling back for another shot, eyed it with fleeting interest, then, with canine resignation, trotted off in search of greener pastures. A crazy idea takes root. His fingers, suddenly thick and uncooperative, grappled with his phone's security. Carol. Desperation clawed at his throat. Maybe Carol could reason with Lily, remind her of his existence, his relevance. He thumbed through his contacts, each second amplifying his distress. Finally, her name appeared, and he tapped call. The electronic rings echoed his rising panic, only to be swallowed by her voicemail. "Hi, it's Carol." Her recorded voice felt like a deliberate snub. He snapped the phone shut in frustration. Of course she was busy, always consumed by her demanding career, her meticulously constructed life. A life that clearly had no space for him, nor, it seemed, for Lily, who couldn't even spare 5 minutes. He started walking, his steps dragging against the pavement. The sinking sun painted elongated, grotesque versions of his form ahead, mocking his stooped posture. Each footfall echoed the growing chasm between him and his daughter. The joyous sounds of children playing nearby twisted into a cruel mockery. He yearned to be part of that world, that shared universe of fathers and daughters, of sticky fingers and laughter-filled games. Now, he was merely a spectator, a forgotten shade haunting the edges of their joy. The humid air pressed against him like a damp cloth, heavy and suffocating. Exhaust fumes mingled with the heady aroma of blooming jasmine, creating a sickening wave of scent. He jammed his hands into his pockets, the coins within chiming a mournful counterpoint to his despair. He passed Mrs. Henderson's meticulously cultivated roses, usually a source of quiet pleasure. Today, their vibrant hues assaulted him, their flawless blooms a stark reminder of his own failings, imperfect, withering, unloved. As he neared his house, a discarded newspaper caught his eye, half submerged in a nearby trash receptacle. He generally avoided the news, a constant stream of negativity, but something drew him to it. The business section shrieked, "Sunshine Transit faces imminent collapse. Can the bus company avert disaster?" He tugged the paper free, the cheap ink staining his fingertips. Sunshine Transit. The company Lily's bus belonged to, the one that had just abandoned her daughter. He skimmed the article, his gaze leaping across the page, plummeting ridership, soaring fuel costs. An aging fleet. Labor unrest. The familiar woes of a struggling business. Mr. Abernathy, the owner, claimed to be exploring all avenues, including a potential sale. A sale? An utterly preposterous idea sparked in George's mind, so audacious it made his head spin. An idea so wildly improbable it bordered on lunacy. If he bought Sunshine Transit, he could guarantee Lily's bus was always on time. He could revamp the routes, prioritizing safety and efficiency. He could even revolutionize the bus itself. A bus that wasn't just punctual, but also enjoyable. A bus with comfortable seating, perhaps even Wi-Fi. A bus that kids would look forward to riding. He envisioned Lily, her face alight with joy, waving from the driver's seat of her very own gadget-engineered marvel. He would be a savior. Not just to Lily, but to every child in the community. He would pull Sunshine Transit back from the abyss, transforming it into a shining beacon of innovation and community spirit. He knew it was madness. He possessed zero experience in running a transportation company. He barely knew how to replace a flat tire. And the capital? Where would he even begin to find it? He certainly didn't have millions gathering dust, but the notion had taken root, a tenacious seed refusing to be dislodged. It was insane, undeniably, but it was also invigorating. It offered purpose, a means to reconnect with Lily, to demonstrate that he was more than just a background player in her life. He gripped the newspaper tightly, the ink smudging onto his shirt. He had an immense amount of work ahead of him, immeasurable research, an array of insurmountable problems to conquer. But for the first time since that bus vanished, leaving Lily stranded, George felt a glimmer of hope, a crazy, impossible, utterly ridiculous hope, but hope nonetheless. Sunshine Transit, a diamond in the rough? The glow of the laptop screen painted George's face in a sickly blue light. He'd been hunched over it for hours, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the manic energy of a man chasing a dream, or perhaps more accurately, fleeing a nightmare. Sunshine Transit. The name sounded so optimistic. The reality, according to the internet, was anything but. He clicked through a series of articles, each one a fresh wave of negativity. Sunshine Transit faces bankruptcy, blared one headline. Aging fleet sparks safety concerns, warned another. A local news piece featured blurry footage of a bus belching black smoke, accompanied by interviews with disgruntled commuters complaining about late arrivals and rude drivers. George winced. This was worse than he'd imagined. He'd pictured a quaint, slightly struggling operation ripe for his brand of gadget-infused revitalization. Instead, he was staring into the abyss of a failing business teetering on the brink of collapse. He scrolled through online reviews. "Drivers are miserable and it shows," one read. "My bus reeked of stale cigarettes and despair," complained another. A particularly scathing review accused a driver of eating a tuna sandwich with the windows closed on a sweltering summer day. George recoiled. Tuna? On a bus? The horror! But amidst the sea of negativity, a few glimmers of hope flickered. One reviewer praised a driver named Earl for always having a kind word. Another mentioned a surprisingly efficient route that got them to work faster than expected. And then there was the occasional comment about the buses themselves. "They're old, but they have character," one person wrote. Character. George latched onto that word. He could work with character. He envisioned gleaming, retrofitted buses, humming with electric engines, and decked out with charging stations and Wi-Fi. He imagined friendly, well-compensated drivers, eager to brighten their passengers' day. He pictured Lily, her face beaming with pride as she rode on a bus that her dad had saved. He pulled up the Sunshine Transit website, a relic of the early 2000s with clashing fonts and pixelated images. The About Us section was a single, uninspired paragraph about providing reliable transportation to the community. George snorted. Reliable? Tuna sandwiches? He could do so much better. He started sketching on a notepad, ideas bubbling to the surface like champagne. He'd replace the old diesel engines with electric motors. Solar panels on the roof could supplement the power. He'd install comfortable, ergonomic seating and equip each bus with a state-of-the-art entertainment system. And of course, there would be an app. A user-friendly interface that tracked bus locations in real time, allowed passengers to book rides in advance, and even offered personalized music playlists based on their destination. He paused, chewing on the end of his pen. The drivers, they were clearly a major problem. He couldn't just replace them all. That wouldn't be fair. He needed to find a way to motivate them, to instill in them a sense of pride and ownership. Maybe profit sharing? Or a Driver of the Month award with a prime parking spot and a gift certificate to a fancy restaurant, no tuna allowed. The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. This wasn't just about buying a bus company. It was about building something better, something brighter, something that would make a real difference in people's lives. It was about showing Lily that he wasn't just some irrelevant, gadget-obsessed dad. He was a visionary, a savior of struggling bus companies, a transportation titan. He leaned back in his chair, the glow of the laptop now seeming less sickly, more like a beacon of hope. The task ahead was daunting, but he was ready. He had a plan, a vision, and a whole lot of caffeine. Sunshine Transit might be a diamond in the rough, but George Gadget was just the man to polish it. He just needed to figure out how to buy a bus company first. Meeting Mr. Grumbles. The aroma of stale coffee and despair hung heavy in the air of Mr. Grumbles' office. George, fiddling with the prototype bus tracker he'd absent-mindedly disassembled and reassembled 3 times in the waiting room, finally heard his name croaked from the doorway. Mr. Grumbles, a man seemingly constructed entirely of crumpled beige linen and perpetual exhaustion, gestured him inside with a sigh that could deflate a tire. His office mirrored his demeanor. Overflowing ashtrays, stacks of yellowed invoices threatening to topple, and a single anemic-looking fern struggling for survival in a cracked pot. "Gadget, is it?" Mr. Grumbles rasped, his voice thick with disuse. He sank into a worn leather chair that groaned in protest. "Heard you wanted to talk." George beamed, despite the less-than-enthusiastic welcome. "Yes, Mr. Grumbles, thank you for seeing me. I'm incredibly excited about Sunshine Transit and its potential." He placed the reassembled tracker on the desk, hoping it looked more impressive than scattered components. Mr. Grumbles eyed the device with suspicion. "Potential, huh?" "Son, the only potential this company has is for a spectacular fiery crash, metaphorically speaking, of course, though, lately, I wouldn't rule out the literal kind either." He gestured vaguely at the piles of paperwork. "It's all a headache. Drivers calling in sick, buses breaking down, nobody wanting to ride anymore." George's smile faltered, but only for a moment. He'd anticipated negativity. "I understand things are challenging, but I see opportunities. Real opportunities to modernize, to improve efficiency, to revitalize the entire company." Mr. Grumbles snorted, a dry, rattling sound. "Revitalize? You make it sound like a wilting houseplant. This isn't a houseplant, Gadget. It's a money pit, a bottomless, soul-sucking money pit." He rubbed his temples wearily. "Truth is, I'm looking to sell. Get out while I still can, before it takes everything." George's heart leaped. "Sell? Really? That's wonderful." He caught himself, realizing his enthusiasm might seem insensitive. "I mean, I'm sorry to hear about the difficulties, of course, but this is precisely what I wanted to discuss. I'm interested in purchasing Sunshine Transit." Mr. Grumbles' eyes, previously glazed with resignation, flickered with a spark of something akin to interest. You? You want to buy this albatross?" "Absolutely. I have a vision for Sunshine Transit, a vision of a modern, efficient, and customer-focused transportation system. I believe I can turn things around, modernize the fleet, streamline the routes, and, most importantly, create a positive and supportive work environment for your employees." George pulled out a meticulously prepared document outlining his plans, complete with charts and graphs. Mr. Grumbles waved it away dismissively. "Plans are cheap, son. It's money that talks, and I need a substantial amount. Years of losses to recoup." George took a deep breath. This was the crucial part. He named a figure, a number that made his own stomach clench. It was far more than he initially intended, stretching his finances to the absolute limit, but he factored in the urgency and Mr. Blank re-tended stretching his finances. Grumbles' weariness. The old man's eyebrows shot up. "That's surprisingly generous." He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in response. "More than I was expecting, to be honest. Why so much?" George straightened his tie, feeling a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. "Because I believe in Sunshine Transit. And because I want to implement my improvements, and I want you to see it succeed. I want you to see the potential realized." He paused, adding, "I am also prepared to offer a profit-sharing agreement if the company exceeds agreed upon performance targets over the next 5 years." Mr. Grumbles studied him intently, his gaze surprisingly sharp. "There's a catch, isn't there?" "Only one," George admitted. "The sale is contingent on my ability to implement my innovations, modernizing the fleet, implementing the technology, improving employee conditions. I need to be in control of those aspects." Mr. Grumbles was silent for a long moment, the only sound the distant rumble of a bus struggling to start outside. Finally, he sighed again, but this time it seemed a little less burdened. "All right, Gadget," he said, extending a hand that felt like dry parchment. "You've got yourself a deal, contingent, of course." A strange glint appeared in his eye. "Just don't come crying to me when those buses start flying into buildings." George takes the wheel. The signing was swift, almost anticlimactic. Mr. Grumbles, a study in weary resignation, barely glanced at the papers. He scribbled his signature with a shaky hand, accepted the certified check with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of decades of disappointment, and handed George a thick ring of keys. "Congratulations, Gadget," he croaked, his voice raspy as sandpaper. "You own a bus company. May it bring you more joy than it brought me." He shuffled out of the office, leaving George alone in the surprisingly clean, yet utterly depressing space. George Gadget, proprietor of Sunshine Transit. The words echoed in his head, bouncing off the yellowed walls. He sank into Grumbles' creaky chair, the leather groaning in protest. A thrill, sharp and exhilarating, shot through him, quickly followed by a wave of dizzying apprehension. He actually did it. He owned a bus company. What on earth was he going to do now? He pulled out his ever-present notebook, its pages already filled with sketches and scribbled ideas. He flipped through the pages, a nervous energy bubbling inside him. The buses needed updating, obviously. They were dinosaurs on wheels, and the routes, inefficient, illogical. He needed to streamline everything, modernize, revolutionize. He imagined Lily, her face lighting up as she rode a state-of-the-art, eco-friendly Sunshine Transit bus. He smiled. He was doing this for her. News rippled through the town of Harmony Creek like a rogue wave. Mildred at the bakery nearly dropped a tray of blueberry muffins. Old Man Hemlock choked on his prune juice at the diner. The idea of George Gadget, the eccentric inventor who spent more time tinkering in his garage than talking to people owning the bus company was, to put it mildly, baffling. "George Gadget?" exclaimed Martha, the town's resident gossip queen, as she adjusted her floral scarf. "But he doesn't even drive. I saw him trying to parallel park once, nearly took out Mrs. Abernathy's prize-winning petunias." Speculation ran rampant. Some whispered that he'd won the lottery. Others theorized that he was secretly a tech billionaire in disguise. The truth, as always, was far more complicated and rooted in a father's desperate hope. George, oblivious to the town's collective bewilderment, was already deep into planning. He spent the afternoon poring over maps of Harmony Creek and the surrounding areas, highlighting routes, marking potential stops, and sketching out designs for new solar-powered charging stations. He envisioned buses with comfortable seating, Wi-Fi, and interactive displays showcasing local businesses and attractions. He wanted to transform Sunshine Transit from a clunky necessity into a pleasant experience, a vital part of the community. He called a meeting with the existing staff, a motley crew of drivers and mechanics who looked as surprised to see him as he was to see them. There was Earl, the perpetually grumpy mechanic whose overalls were permanently stained with grease. Betty, the kind-hearted dispatcher who knew everyone's schedule by heart, and a handful of drivers, each with their own unique story and connection to the town. He laid out his vision, his enthusiasm bubbling over, his words tumbling out in a rush. He spoke of innovation, efficiency, and community engagement. He showed them his sketches, his eyes shining with excitement. They stared back at him, a mixture of skepticism and wary curiosity on their faces. Earl grunted, Betty knitted her brow, and the drivers exchanged hesitant glances. "With all due respect, Mr. Gadget," Betty finally said, her voice gentle but firm, "these buses are held together with duct tape and prayer, and most folks around here are just happy to get from point A to point B." George's smile faltered slightly. He hadn't anticipated such immediate resistance. He'd envisioned them embracing his ideas, seeing the potential, sharing his passion. But he realized, with a jolt, that he was dealing with real people, with real concerns, not just abstract concepts on a page. He took a deep breath. I understand, he said, trying to sound confident. But I believe we can do better. We can make Sunshine Transit something special, something the whole town can be proud of. He looked at them, his eyes pleading. I need your help. I can't do this alone. Bright colors and bumpy rides. The first casualty was beige. George loathed beige. It represented everything he wanted Sunshine Transit to shed: dullness, conformity, and the crushing weight of mediocrity. He envisioned a kaleidoscope on wheels, a joyous explosion of color that would banish the town's perpetual gloom. He'd spent the previous evening hunched over paint swatches, a mad scientist concocting a potion of hues. Lily hadn't called, but he'd left her a voicemail detailing his progress, describing the shades of optimistic orange and razzle-dazzle raspberry he'd chosen. He imagined her rolling her eyes, but secretly he hoped a tiny smile might play on her lips. Now, armed with his carefully selected palette, he descended upon the Sunshine Transit Depot like a Technicolor tornado. Mr. Grumbles had left behind a surprisingly well-stocked paint shop, and George, fueled by coffee and manic energy, wasted no time. He donned a pair of paint-splattered overalls and, humming a jaunty tune, began transforming the flagship bus. He started with the roof, slathering on a coat of sunshine yellow so vibrant it practically glowed. Then came the sides, a patchwork of contrasting colors that would have made Mondrian weep with envy. He even added whimsical touches, cartoon suns around the wheels, and a rainbow arc across the back. The existing drivers watched from the break room window, their expressions ranging from mild amusement to outright horror. Doris, the veteran driver with a permanent scowl etched onto her face, muttered something about sacrilege and the end of days. By the time he'd finished the first bus, George was covered head to toe in paint, his hair a veritable rainbow of colors. He stood back, admiring his handiwork, a grin stretching across his face. It was perfect. Utterly, wonderfully, perfectly imperfect. Next came the interior. He'd ordered custom-made seat covers in plush, psychedelic patterns. Gone were the hard, utilitarian plastic seats, replaced by something that resembled a mobile living room. He added throw pillows in the shape of fluffy clouds and little solar-powered fans that spun silently, spreading a gentle breeze. He even installed a small bookshelf stocked with comic books and paperbacks. He found an old gumball machine at a flea market and bolted it near the entrance, filling it with colorful, sugar-free gum. For the kids. He declared to the bewildered mechanic Bob, who was attempting to change a tire while simultaneously avoiding getting splashed with rogue droplets of electric blue. The driver's initial amusement quickly curdled into something resembling outright rebellion. A delegation, led by Doris, confronted him in the depot. "Gadget," Doris began, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "These modifications are unacceptable." George blinked, his enthusiasm momentarily deflated. Unacceptable? But they're fun. They're inviting. Fun? Snorted Frank, a driver known for his perpetually grumpy demeanor. I'll tell you what's not fun. Trying to drive a bus that looks like it was designed by a toddler on acid. And these seats, they're too soft. People will fall asleep. The pillows are a safety hazard, added Martha, a meticulous driver who always wore gloves. Someone's going to trip on them. George's smile faltered. But I thought I wanted to make the bus rides more enjoyable, more memorable. Memorable, all right, Doris said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I'll never forget the day I had to explain to the police why my bus looks like a unicorn threw up on it. And what about cleaning? Asked Bob, wiping grease from his brow. These fancy seat covers are going to be a nightmare. And that gumball machine? A sticky mess waiting to happen. George looked around at their faces, a wave of disappointment washing over him. He'd envisioned a joyous revolution, a transformation that would revitalize Sunshine Transit and bring a smile to everyone's face. Instead, he was met with resistance, skepticism, and a healthy dose of outright hostility. He sighed, running a hand through his paint-streaked hair. "Okay," he said, his voice subdued. "Okay, maybe. Maybe I went a little overboard." Doris narrowed her eyes. "A little?" "All right, a lot overboard," George conceded. But I just wanted to try something different. To make a difference. He paused, searching for the right words. To make Lily proud. The mention of his daughter seemed to momentarily soften Doris's expression, but only momentarily. Look, Gadget, she said, her voice softening slightly. We appreciate the thought, but this is a bus company, not a circus. We need practicality, reliability, and something that doesn't scare the passengers half to death. George nodded slowly, the weight of reality settling upon him. He had a lot to learn. Maybe making a difference wasn't as simple as slapping on a coat of paint and throwing in a few fluffy pillows. Maybe it required something more, something deeper. He looked at the half-painted buses, the psychedelic seat covers, and the gumball machine, a sense of unease creeping into his heart. He'd charged in, full of enthusiasm and good intentions, but he'd completely failed to understand the needs of his employees and the reality of running a bus company. And still, Lily hadn't called. The never forget system fiasco. Unfazed by the cool response to his bubble-blowing bus, George burst into the driver's lounge, a spark of mischief in his gaze. Team, today marks a revolution in timeliness and rider satisfaction. With a flourish, he presented a motley collection of jury-rigged contraptions affixed to the wall, a chaotic mess of exposed wiring, winking diodes, and repurposed kitchen timers. I give you the punctuality enforcer. A wave of groans swept the room. Even the imperturbable Manny massaged his forehead. Lily, who'd only hoped for a quick coffee and a moment with her father, slumped into a chair, drawing her hoodie closer. Oblivious, George pressed on. Each bus gets its own unit. A gentle alert, 5 minutes before departure. At 3 minutes, a slightly insistent chime and a pulsating azure light. And at 1, well, you get the picture. Tardiness, route amnesia, banished. He beamed, clearly pleased with his brainstorm. What constitutes gentle at, dark 30? Questioned Dolores, a seasoned driver famed for her tart remarks. Precisely calibrated. George proclaimed, brandishing a decibel reader to demonstrate, only to have it slip from his grasp and shatter on the linoleum. Lily winced. The inaugural run of the punctuality enforcer was a debacle. By 6:15, the whole shebang went berserk. Instead of subtle alerts, the lounge reverberated with a jarring medley of shrieking alarms. The lights strobed with manic intensity. Drivers, jolted awake and disoriented, blundered about, colliding in the pandemonium. Manny, already behind schedule, mistakenly snatched Dolores's keys. Dolores, in retaliation, grabbed the key to the Sunshine Dream machine, which was supposed to be mothballed after its prior incident with the rogue Bubbles. The buses lurched out of the depot in a confused exodus. The alarms continued their relentless assault on the ears of anyone within blocks. From the doorway, Lily's face burned with shame as she watched Mrs. Rodriguez, their neighbor, shaking a fist. Early commuters, initially optimistic, now wore expressions of utter bewilderment. Inside the Dream Machine, Dolores found that George had inadvertently set the audio system to blare polka music at full blast. Passengers anticipating a normal ride were instead assaulted by a deafening polka version of Roll Out the Barrel. Meanwhile, Manny discovered he was halfway to Elm Street on the wrong itinerary. He attempted to radio the dispatcher, who was overwhelmed by complaints and the incessant alarms and unable to understand his garbled pleas. George, in a desperate bid to silence the punctuality enforcer, managed only to trigger a siren that sounded suspiciously like an air raid warning. He then tripped over a loose cable, sending a domino effect of egg timers clattering to the floor. Lily had reached her limit. She threaded her way through the dazed drivers and seized her father's arm. "Dad, stop! Just please!" George, red-faced and perspiring, looked at her, the gleam of invention momentarily extinguished. "But I was trying to be helpful." "I know, Dad," Lily said softly, barely audible above the clamor. "But sometimes your help makes things worse." She surveyed the mayhem, the aggravated drivers, the pulsating lights. "People are making fun of us." George's shoulders slumped. He gazed at Lily, really saw her, and detected not pride, but acute embarrassment in her eyes. It was a blow more crushing than any failed enterprise. I didn't realize, he faltered, finally silencing the siren with a desperate yank of a wire. The sudden quiet was nearly as unsettling as the noise had been. Lily sighed heavily. It's all right, Dad. Maybe just focus on fixing the buses for now, and perhaps let someone else handle the scheduling? She forced a weak smile. And can we go home, please? George nodded silently, the effervescent inventor suddenly drained. He followed Lily from the lounge, leaving behind a scene of utter pandemonium. As they walked to the parking area, he overheard two drivers grumbling about George's gadgetry gone wild and the man's lost his marbles. George winced. The silence in the car was thick. Lily stared out the window, lost in her thoughts. George knew he'd blundered spectacularly. He'd wanted to be a savior, to earn Lily's admiration, but had only succeeded in magnifying his own absurdity, and worse, he had mortified his daughter. The gulf between them seemed wider than ever. Second thoughts and wise words. The Sunshine Transit office was a tomb of silence. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, slicing through grimy windows, illuminating the scattered remnants of George's dashed aspirations. Blueprints like fallen leaves, defunct gears, and the ghost of burnt rubber. He was a statue of dejection in his chair, the weight of his failures a palpable oppression. Lily's pointed words from yesterday echoed, each syllable a sharp jab at his tattered self-esteem. A half-eaten sandwich sat on his desk, the bread curling into a pathetic smile. Even hunger had abandoned him. He'd pictured himself a titan of industry, a savior of Sunshine Transit, a figure of admiration in Lily's eyes. Instead, he was a walking calamity, a harbinger of misfortune. A sigh wheezed from him, a sound like a deflating balloon. Perhaps Lily was right. Maybe he was in over his head. This entire venture, possibly, was a monumental blunder. The tantalizing whisper of surrender slithered into his thoughts. Sell, cut bait, and run before the damage worsened. His hand, unsteady, reached for the phone. A call to a broker would set the wheels in motion. It was capitulation undeniably, but wouldn't a graceful exit be preferable to this agonizing freefall? A gentle rap at the door forestalled the call. He grunted, not bothering to lift his head. "Come in," he mumbled, his voice thick with defeat. The door swung inward, and Mr. Grumbles shuffled in, concern etched on his face, like wrinkles on parchment. He cradled a steaming mug, its chamomile fragrance a fragile counterpoint to the despair. "Heard about the incident," he offered, his tone uncharacteristically soft. George managed a wan smile. "That's one way to put it, Mr. Grumbles. Incident is why I'm contemplating pulling the plug. Mr. Grumbles shuffled closer, setting the mug on the cluttered desk. "Chamomile soothes the frayed edges. You look like you haven't slept in days." George accepted the mug. The warmth, a welcome sensation on his chilled hands. He took a cautious sip. "Thanks, I haven't, and frankly, I don't expect to anytime soon. Mr. Grumbles lowered himself onto a rickety chair, his gaze unwavering. "Running a venture like this isn't a cakewalk, George. Expect setbacks, stumbles, days when it feels like you're facing an insurmountable wall. It's the nature of the beast." "But I'm not just struggling, Mr. Grumbles," George countered, frustration coloring his voice. "I'm actively worsening things. I'm alienating Lily. This was supposed to unite us, but it's achieving the exact opposite." Mr. Grumbles was silent for a long moment, his eyes dissecting George with unsettling intensity. "Why did you acquire this company, George?" he finally inquired. "Really?" George hesitated, searching for the true motivation. I wanted to prove my worth, to show Lily that I could accomplish something meaningful." "And why was it so imperative to demonstrate your worth to Lily?" Mr. Grumbles pressed. The answer was self-evident, yet he'd never explicitly acknowledged it, not even to himself. "Because I love her," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Because I want to shield her, because I dread her thinking I'm a failure." Comprehension flickered across Mr. Flace. Grumbles' weathered face. Protect her from what, George? The world's harsh realities, adversity itself? Or from the notion that you lack capability? George stared at his hands, the revelation striking him like a physical blow. He hadn't been trying to safeguard Lily, he'd been trying to protect himself from perceived inadequacy. He'd become so consumed by his own anxieties that he'd lost sight of everything else. He recalled Lily's birth, that tidal wave of love and a fierce protective instinct as he cradled her small, delicate form in his arms. He'd vowed to always be her anchor, her guide, the wind beneath her wings. Somewhere along the line, he'd lost his way. Obsessed with his own ambitions, he'd forgotten what it truly meant to be a father. "You invested in this bus company for Lily, didn't you, mister?" Grumbles prompted gently, breaking into George's introspection. "Yet, it seems you are piloting it for yourself. You must remember your most precious cargo, George, and navigate with her well-being as your true north." He looked up at Mr. Grumbles, renewed resolve blazing in his eyes. "You're right," he affirmed, his voice gaining strength. "I can't surrender, not now, not ever." He took another swallow of the chamomile tea, the former bitterness now infused with a sense of purpose. There was a mountain of work ahead, a catalogue of errors to remedy, and a multitude of apologies to deliver. But he was ready. He was ready to be the father Lily deserved. Fixing more than buses. The first thing George did Monday morning was dismantle his invention station in the garage. The half-finished robotic arm, the self-inflating tire prototype, and the experimental fuel additive went into labeled bins. Progress, he realized, wasn't about flashy gadgets, it was about listening. He found Mr. Grumbles scrubbing down a bus, his usual thunderous expression in place. "Morning, Mr. Grumbles," George said, keeping his tone neutral. Mr. Grumbles grunted in response, not even glancing up. "I wanted to ask you something," George continued. "If you could change one thing about these buses, what would it be?" Mr. Grumbles finally stopped scrubbing, turning to face George with narrowed eyes. "Just one?" he asked, skepticism dripping from his voice. "Okay, maybe two," George conceded, managing a small smile. The floodgates opened. Mr. Grumbles launched into a detailed critique of the bus fleet, covering everything from the perpetually sticky accelerator pedal on Bus 7 to the inadequate heating in Bus 3, especially brutal during the early morning runs. He complained about the uncomfortable seats, the poorly placed mirrors, and the rattling windows that sounded like a chorus of angry ghosts. George listened intently, scribbling notes on a pad he'd brought. He didn't interrupt, didn't defend his past actions. He just listened. By the end of Mr. Grumbles' tirade, George's hand ached, and his notepad was filled with observations. He thanked Mr. Grumbles, promising to look into everything. The older man just harumphed and went back to scrubbing, but George thought he detected a flicker of something akin to hope in his eyes. He spent the rest of the day talking to the other drivers. Martha, who drove the school route, complained about the low step on Bus 5, which made it difficult for some of the younger children to climb aboard. Hector mentioned the faulty windshield wipers on Bus 2, which smeared more than they cleaned during rain. Even shy Mrs. Peterson, who usually avoided him, cautiously mentioned the dim interior lights on Bus 8, making it hard to see fares at night. Armed with this newfound knowledge, George swapped his lab coat for overalls and got to work. He started with the simple fixes. He adjusted the accelerator pedal on Bus 7, replaced the windshield wipers on Bus 2, and installed brighter bulbs in Bus 8. He ordered a small step stool for Bus 5 and spent an afternoon tightening rattling windows and oiling squeaky doors. He even tackled the heating problem in Bus 3. He found a loose connection and after some tinkering warm air finally blasted from the vents. He could almost hear Mr. Grumbles' surprised grunt of approval. The drivers noticed. Martha thanked him for the step stool, telling him how much easier it was for the children. Hector gave him a grateful nod, saying the new wipers were a lifesaver during the afternoon downpour. Mrs. Peterson offered him a shy smile, telling him she felt much safer with the brighter lights. Mr. Grumbles, predictably, offered no direct praise. But George saw him testing the heater in Bus 3, a faint smile playing on his lips. The next morning, Mr. Grumbles simply said, Not bad, Gadget, not bad. It was the highest compliment George had received since buying Sunshine Transit. He realized then that he hadn't just been fixing buses, he'd been fixing something within himself. The need to prove himself, to impress Lily, had blinded him to the simple act of genuine connection. By listening to his employees, by addressing their concerns, he was building something real, something tangible. He was earning their respect, not demanding it. That evening, as he was wiping grease from his hands, Lily walked into the garage. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him work. "Mr. Grumbles said the heater's working again," she finally said, her voice tentative. George looked up, surprised. "Yeah, it was just a loose connection." Lily hesitated, then gestured towards the buses. They seem better." "They are," George said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "I'm actually listening to the drivers now." Lily nodded slowly, her gaze softening. "That's good, Dad." It wasn't a declaration of love or a complete absolution of his past mistakes, but it was a start. And for the first time since buying Sunshine Transit, George felt like he was on the right track. He was fixing more than buses. He was slowly, painstakingly, repairing his relationship with his daughter. Sunshine on wheels. The relentless Seattle drizzle had turned the bus depot into a swamp. George, clad in a soaked yellow raincoat that did little to keep him dry, wrestled with a stubborn lug nut on the rear wheel of Bus 7. Lily watched from the doorway of the mechanic's bay, a mug of hot chocolate warming her hands. She'd come to drop off lunch, a pathetic offering of day-old sandwiches, but lingered, mesmerized by the sheer, dogged determination etched on her father's face. He wasn't inventing anything, wasn't grandstanding, just fixing a bus. He grunted, the nut finally giving way. He tossed his wrench into a toolbox with a clang and wiped his brow with a greasy rag, leaving a smudge of black across his forehead. He looked up, startled to see Lily. "Hey, kiddo," he said, a tired but genuine smile spreading across his face. "Didn't see you there." "Lunch," she said, holding up the bag. "Peanut butter and jelly, again." He chuckled, taking the bag and gratefully accepting the mug of hot chocolate. "Thanks, Lily Pad. You're a lifesaver." He took a large gulp, his eyes closing in momentary bliss. "You know," he said after a moment, "old Betsy here gave me a good scare. Thought I was going to have to call in reinforcements, but I got her." He patted the bus affectionately, leaving a greasy handprint on the faded paint. Something shifted in Lily. She saw not the eccentric inventor, the man who'd once tried to install a bubble bath in a bus, but a man simply trying to make things work. A man working in the rain, covered in grease for what? For Sunshine Transit. For her, maybe? What was wrong with it? She asked, genuinely curious. George launched into a detailed explanation of worn brake pads and a faulty caliper, his passion for mechanics surprisingly infectious. Lily listened, really listened, for the first time in what felt like forever. She saw the pride he took in solving the problem, the satisfaction of making something broken whole again. The next day, Lily found herself back at the depot. This time, she wasn't delivering lunch. She was armed with a notebook and pen. "Okay," she said, marching into George's makeshift office. "Let's talk about Sunshine Transit, seriously." George, who was attempting to balance a stack of invoices on a wobbly coffee cup, nearly knocked the whole thing over. "Lily? What's all this?" "I've been thinking," she said, ignoring his surprise. "Sunshine Transit is, well, it's kind of depressing. The buses are old, the routes are confusing, and nobody even knows it exists." George winced. "Ouch, but fair enough." "So," Lily continued, "we need to make it not depressing. We need to make it something people actually want to use." And so began a new phase of Sunshine Transit. Lily, with her youthful energy and understanding of social media, brought a fresh perspective. She suggested things George would never have considered. Wi-Fi on the buses, USB charging ports, a loyalty program for frequent riders. George, initially skeptical, was won over by Lily's enthusiasm and the practical logic behind her ideas. He even admitted that his own attempts at innovation had been a tad overzealous. Together, they worked on redesigning the bus routes, making them more efficient and accessible. Lily created a website and social media pages, showcasing the improved services and highlighting the drivers and mechanics who kept Sunshine Transit running. They organized community events, offering free rides to local festivals and partnering with businesses to offer discounts to passengers. Lily even convinced George to let her paint a mural on the side of one of the buses, depicting local landmarks and scenes of community life. Slowly but surely, Sunshine Transit began to transform. The buses were cleaner, the rides were smoother, and the atmosphere was brighter. Passengers started to smile, to chat with each other, to feel a sense of connection. Sunshine Transit wasn't just a bus company anymore, it was becoming a part of the community. One afternoon, Lily and George were driving down Main Street in Bus 3, newly painted with Lily's vibrant mural. A group of children waved enthusiastically as they passed, shouting, "Sunshine Bus, Sunshine Bus!" George beamed, a genuine warmth spreading through him. He glanced at Lily, who was grinning from ear to ear. "We did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We actually did it." Lily leaned over and bumped his shoulder playfully. "We did," she agreed, "and it's pretty awesome." Even though the school year was ending and Lily would soon be thinking about leaving for college, she knew that Sunshine Transit would be okay. Maybe this was how they would stay connected, even when she was miles away. Later that evening, as George was locking up the depot, Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived down the street, approached him. She'd always relied on Sunshine Transit to get to her doctor's appointments and the grocery store. "Mr. Gadget," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I just wanted to thank you. Sunshine Transit has been a lifeline for me, and you've made it even better. It feels like you really care." George, humbled by her words, simply nodded. "We do, Mrs. Henderson. We really do." As he walked home that night, the Seattle rain seemed less oppressive, the city lights a little brighter. He had started this venture to reconnect with his daughter, to prove himself worthy. But somewhere along the way, he had found something more, a sense of purpose, a connection to his community, and a renewed appreciation for the simple joy of making a difference. And, perhaps most importantly, he had found his way back to Lily, not through grand gestures or outlandish inventions, but through shared effort and genuine connection. Sunshine Transit wasn't just a bus company. It was a testament to the power of second chances and the unexpected rewards of accidental abandonment.